There's a famous phrase I think we probably have all heard before. That phrase is standing on the shoulders of giants. And the definition of that phrase is, quote, "It's a famous metaphor for making intellectual or creative progress by building on the discoveries of those who came before us. It acknowledges that even groundbreaking achievements of our own rely on the foundational work of earlier generations." Well, one of the people who are credited with first using that, maybe he wasn't the first, but one of the first, in 1675, Isaac Newton wrote a letter to his rival, Robert Hooke, stating, quote, "If I have seen further than others, it is by standing on the shoulders of giants." Of course, Newton was acknowledging that any progress that he made in science was based on the discoveries of those scientists who came before him. Well, standing on the shoulders of giants doesn't just apply to the scientific discoveries or educational things. It's applicable really to any area of our life, and it's particularly applicable when we are looking at gaining heavenly wisdom for earthly living. When it comes to gaining wisdom, there are two ways to gain it: the hard way or the easy way. Right, the hard way would be to reinvent the wheel, right? Start from scratch, disregard anything that anyone else has done in the past, start with a blank slate, and then throughout your life, gain your own wisdom through your own experiences, through your ups and downs, your successes and failures, and that takes a long time. And you probably wouldn't get as far, wouldn't gain as much wisdom doing it that way, the hard way. Or we could do it the easy way. The easy way would be standing on the shoulders of giants, picking up where those who came before us left off, learning from their mistakes, learning from their discoveries, getting the wisdom passed on from them so we have a better starting point. We're starting further along than they did, thus allowing us to go even further, become more wise, gain more wisdom. And then it's up to us then to pass that on to the next generation. With each generation, hopefully, getting a little head start, a little boost. In Job chapter 12, verse 12, it says, "Wisdom is with the aged, and understanding in length of days." In other words, it takes a long time to really gain wisdom. So if we do it the hard way, it could take us our whole life to really gain that heavenly wisdom for earthly living that God has for us. But God has given us the book of Proverbs, right? A collection of wisdom that we can, if you want to say, we can take a shortcut, right? The only true shortcut to gaining wisdom is standing on the shoulders of giants. And in the book of Proverbs, we can stand on Solomon's shoulders, the wisest man who ever lived, and glean from the wisdom that God gave him. God gave Solomon wisdom, and then he led him to document it for us in what we call the book of Proverbs. The book of Proverbs has 31 chapters, and somebody has pointed out that that is perfect for each day of the month, for those 31-day months, right? So a lot of people will read through the book of Proverbs. They'll read a chapter a day for a month, and then they start over again. So you can actually get through the book of Proverbs 12 times in a year if you do that. And that would make sense. If it's the words of the wisest man who ever lived, it makes sense to read it over and over and over again to try to glean as much wisdom from Solomon as we can. In the book of Proverbs, Solomon covers a gamut of topics, really from soup to nuts, as they say. He covers a lot of topics that are applicable to us today. In the book of Proverbs, Solomon covers such topics as personal conduct, sexual relations, business, wealth, charity, ambition, discipline, debt, child rearing, character, alcohol, politics, revenge, godliness, and I could go on and on and on. There is just a wealth of information, all different topics that Solomon covers in the book of Proverbs. Now, last time we kind of did an overview of what Solomon had to say about wisdom itself. Now, we're looking at this wisdom book, trying to acquire heavenly wisdom for our earthly living. So we started by looking at what Solomon had to say about wisdom. And you'll remember the 3 points that we covered was the value of wisdom, what it's worth to us, the desire for wisdom, how badly do we want it, and then the source of wisdom. Where can we get it? Well, today we are going to now dive into Proverbs Chapter 1, and we're going to begin gleaning some of this wisdom that Solomon has put here in this book. And again, as I mentioned last time, this is not a deep dive into every nook and cranny, every line, every verse, every word in Proverbs. We're going to kind of go through different chapters, glean the nuggets we can get out of those chapters, but we're not going to hit every chapter throughout this series. But today we are going to go through the entire first chapter of Proverbs. So if you turn to Proverbs chapter 1, and remember what I said, if you put your Bible here and just kind of break it in the middle, you should come close to either Psalms or Proverbs, or Isaiah, I guess. I happen to went too far. Or you can use a little ribbon like I have, put it in Proverbs. But usually right in the middle, you'll usually hit Proverbs or Psalms. But today we're in Proverbs chapter 1, and it begins in verse 1. Proverbs chapter 1, verse 1. The Proverbs of Solomon, son of David, king of Israel. So as we discussed last time, most of the book of Proverbs, not all of it, but most of it was written by King Solomon. In 1 Kings 4:32, we're told that Solomon spoke 3,000 proverbs. So I don't know that all 3,000 are recorded for us in the book of Proverbs, but we do get a good sampling of some of the proverbs that Solomon spoke. Solomon was born around 990 BC. He reigned from 970 to 931 BC. So these words that we're reading were written almost 3,000 years ago. But it's amazing how applicable they are to us today. 3,000 years later, his words of wisdom still apply to us. We can still learn from them and apply them to our lives. That's true wisdom. So before we get any further, what is a proverb? According to Webster's 1828 Dictionary of the English Language, a proverb is a short sentence, often repeated, expressing a well-known truth or common fact, ascertained by experience or observation, a maxim of wisdom. So we are going to be digging into a book containing a maxim of wisdom, or maxims of wisdom that we're going to be looking at. Before we go further, though, let's look at the writing style. Proverbs is actually written in a Hebrew poetry format. And like many of the Psalms, Proverbs is written in what's called Hebrew parallelism. In this style of writing, you'll see train of thought repeated. Right? They'll state a fact and then it's repeated in one way or another. And there's two types of parallelism. Sometimes it's called synonymous parallelism, when the first statement is repeated by something that is similar to the first statement. Reworded slightly different, but has the same meaning, just kind of to emphasize the point. For example, if we put up here Proverbs 22, verse 1. Proverbs 22, verse 1 says, "A good name is to be chosen rather than great riches, and favor is better than silver or gold." So you see here, a good name is the first statement, and its synonym is favor. Right? Favor means good reputation. So a good name is to be chosen, Oh, and favor is better. Okay, so that's the synonyms. Also, great riches is a synonym to silver or gold. So a good name is to be chosen rather than great riches. Then he restates it. Favor is better than silver or gold. So that is synonymous parallelism, where the repeated part is the same, has the same meaning, just kind of emphasizes it, looking at it a different way, different words. Okay, sometimes Proverbs uses what is called antithetical parallelism. In this case, the repeat is the opposite of the first thing. So let's look at Proverbs 22, verse 3. Proverbs 22, verse 3, the prudent sees danger and hides himself, but the simple go on and suffer for it. So here, in the first half, it's the prudent, right? The wise, the smart. And then in the second half, it's but the simple. You know, and simple meaning like simpleton, somebody who's not quite as wise, not as smart. And then the results of those cases are different as well. The prudent, they see danger and they hide themselves from it, so they're protected from it. But the simple, they just plow on and they suffer for it. So that's an example of antithetical parallelism. So as we go through the book of Proverbs, you'll notice a lot of repeating or a lot of this, opposites, and that's why it's a form of Hebrew poetry, and it's just a style that is used, and it just helps reinforce the point that the author is trying to make. So you'll notice as we go throughout, if this was a class, I'd have assignments, and you'd have to underline and tell me, is this a synonymous or is this antithetical? But I won't do that to you today. All right, so let's move on. Proverbs chapter 1, verses 2 through 7. Proverbs chapter 1, verses 2 through 7. To know wisdom and instruction, to understand words of insight, to receive instruction in wise dealing, in righteousness, justice, and equity, to give prudence to the simple, knowledge and discernment to the youth. Let the wise hear and increase in learning, and the one who understands obtain guidance. To understand a proverb and a saying, the words of the wise and their riddles. The fear of the Lord is the beginning of knowledge. Fools despise wisdom and instruction. So Solomon begins his book explaining to us the importance of being teachable. Right? What he's talking about here is being open to wisdom, being open to receive instruction, to having a teachable spirit. What he's saying here is wise people are lifelong learners. Wise people have a teachable spirit. They crave learning. They're open to new ideas. So we must remain teachable. Regardless of how old we are, how set we get in our ways, we need to remain teachable, to continue to receive God's heavenly wisdom for our earthly living. Anyone who has ever been a teacher knows that it's next to impossible to teach somebody who doesn't want to learn. Right? Somebody who thinks that this lesson is beneath them, or they know more than the teacher, or they just don't want to be there. You can just see it in their body language. They close up, their mind closes, and you just can't get through to them. If somebody doesn't want to learn, you're just not going to be able to teach them. And so what Solomon's telling us here is that we need to maintain that teachable spirit. We need to be open to new ideas. And it's not just teens that suffer from this attitude of, I know more than my parents, or I know more than my teacher, right? There's some of us who are, what do they say, long in the tooth? Some of us with the gray hair. There's an old saying, you can't teach an old dog new tricks. The reason that's an old saying is because it's true in many instances, right? The older we get, the more set in our ways we get. It's harder for us to be taught new ways of doing things when we've been doing it just fine this way for 30, 40, 50 years, right? So we got to break that. We can't be those old dogs that can't learn new tricks. We need to be open to learning new things. when I was just first starting out, I was 21 years old, got my first paying job at a radio station. That was one of my life goals when I was young. I wanted to be a radio DJ. And right after Chris and I got married, I got this job at a small country station, and it didn't pay very much. And so the station manager recognized that and said, hey, if you want to supplement your income, what do you think about learning how to sell radio advertising? And I said, if it gives me more money, sure, sign me up. So he had this course that was on cassette tapes for how to sell radio advertising. And so I listened to it diligently. I took notes, and I was really absorbing it, and I went out and tried to sell. And there was something in there. I don't remember exactly now what it is, but just for example purposes, I'm going to say that one of the things they talked about was a lead tracking system. And so I went back to the station manager and said, hey, where's our lead tracking system? This guy talks about a lead tracking system. And the manager says, oh, we don't have that. And I said, but that's one of the key things that this guy says we need to do. And he said, you know what? He got his money from us. I don't have to listen to everything he teaches. And even as a young man, it just struck me wrong. It's like, why would you invest in this training course? Why would you give somebody money for their wisdom? You obviously thought they had wisdom that would benefit you. Why would you give them money and then not listen to all of the lessons they were trying to teach you? It just didn't make sense to me. But some people are like that. They just aren't teachable. And some of us, maybe we're teachable in some areas of our life, but we're not teachable in others. Right? We each have those areas that we think, either we think we're the expert, or we've been there, done that, we don't want to learn anymore, whatever it is. We're not teachable where we need to be. So we need to maintain a teachable spirit. So if you're following along in your bulletin, on the back of your bulletin is an outline. The first lesson that Solomon has for us here in chapter 1, point number 1 is a wise person has a teachable spirit. A wise person has a teachable spirit. Right? Wise people strive to continue to learn. It's as if he's saying, look, if you're going to read beyond verse 7 here, I have a lot of things to teach you, but you must have a teachable spirit, or it's all just going to go in one ear and out the other. So if you're going to read any further in this book, you need to have a teachable spirit. You need to be open to learning. All right, that was point number 1. Let's continue Proverbs chapter 1, verses 8 through 19. Proverbs chapter 1, verses 8 through 19. Hear, my son, your father's instruction, and forsake not your mother's teaching. For they are a graceful garland for your head, and pendants for your neck. My son, if sinners entice you, do not consent. If they say, come with us, let us lie in wait for blood. Let us ambush the innocent without reason. Like Sheol, let us swallow them alive and whole, like those who go down to the pit. We shall find all precious goods. We shall fill our houses with plunder. Throw in your lot among us. We will all have one purse. My son, do not walk in the way with them. Hold back your foot from their paths. For their feet run to evil, and they make haste to shed blood. For in vain is a net spread in the sight of any bird. But these men lie in wait for their own blood. They set an ambush for their own lives. Such are the ways of everyone who is greedy for unjust gain. It takes away the life of its possessors. This is a common theme that we're going to see throughout Proverbs. Solomon talks a lot about paying attention to the company you keep, right? Hanging out with the right crowd, having the right friends, surrounding yourselves with the right people. We kind of talked about this last time. Remember I said if you want to soar with the eagles, you can't hang out with turkeys. We need to be wise in the friends that we choose. In 1 Corinthians 15, verse 33, 1 Corinthians 15, verse 33 says, "Do not be deceived, bad company ruins good morals." And this whole section can be summarized in Proverbs 13, verse 20. Proverbs 13, verse 20 says, "Whoever walks with the wise becomes wise, but the companion of fools will suffer harm." So here Solomon gives us lesson number 2. Lesson number 2 from this chapter is, a wise person chooses his friends wisely. A wise person chooses his friends wisely. What Solomon is saying here in this passage 8 through 19 is that if you have greedy friends, their greed is going to lead them into all sorts of mischief, all sorts of trouble. And if you hang out with them, you are likely to be drawn into that trouble. Right? You're going to be just heaped in with the rest of them. You know, those of us who are parents and kind of watch what friends our kids hung out with, we were always concerned about them hanging out with the right ones, right? And we know the wrong ones, right? We could recognize it maybe more than our own kids could, that, you know what, you really don't want to be hanging out with, these guys are trouble, right? This group is trouble. You want to stay away from them. And as teachers, and all the teachers in here, we saw the kids in our classes who were drawn away. Good kids who were led astray because they chose the wrong group of friends. Well, it's not just kids. You know, it applies to us too. We need to surround ourselves with wise people. People who we can learn from, who aren't going to lead us astray. All right, finishing up the chapter, Proverbs chapter 1. Verses 20 through 33. Proverbs chapter 1, verses 20 to 33. "Wisdom cries aloud in the street. In the markets she raises her voice. At the head of the noisy streets she cries out. At the entrance of the city gates she speaks. How long, O simple ones, will you love being simple? How long will scoffers delight in their scoffing, and fools hate knowledge? If you turn at my reproof, behold, I will pour out my spirit to you. I will make my words known to you. Because I have called, and you refuse to listen, have stretched out my hand, and no one has heeded, because you have ignored all my counsel, and would have none of my reproof, I also will laugh at your calamity. I will mock when terror strikes you. When terror strikes you like a storm and your calamity comes like a whirlwind, when distress and anguish come upon you, then they will call upon me, but I will not answer. They will seek me diligently, but will not find me. Because they hated knowledge and did not choose the fear of the Lord, would have none of my counsel, and despised all my reproof, therefore they shall eat the fruit of their way, and have their fill of their own devices. For the simple are killed by their turning away, and the complacency of fools destroys them. But whoever listens to me will dwell secure and will be at ease without dread or disaster. So when you read through that passage, verse 32 should really jump out at us and give us warning. Verse 32 says that for the simple are killed by their turning away, and the complacency of fools destroys them. That should be enough to make us hunger for the wisdom of the Lord. Right? We don't want to be caught up in that. You know, the Lord created us. The Lord created the earth. The Lord created the whole universe. And He knows what's best. He has a plan for our life. He knows what He wants to accomplish through all of this creation. And He's given us a user's guide right here. We'd be wise to read the owner's manual, right? You read the user's guide. God has given us His wisdom on how He wants us to live. But too often, people shun it. They don't want to hear it. They don't want to read God's wisdom. Only when we accept His wisdom in our life will we be able to become the people He's created us to be, to fulfill our purpose, the purpose that He created us for. But you have to be willing to change as He teaches you, right? We got to take that wisdom and then be willing to change. And that's what the third lesson is. The third lesson from Solomon, point number 3, a wise person desires wisdom and is willing to change. A wise person desires wisdom and is willing to change. It's one thing to hear the wisdom. It's another to accept that wisdom, take it into your life, and let it change you. Let it change your behavior. Let it change your walk. Let it change the way you relate to the Lord and relate to others. We've got to accept His wisdom and then let it change us. And we talked about last time that the desire for wisdom. And to be wise, we must desire God's wisdom above everything else. Well, in verse 22, wisdom is crying out here, "How long, O simple ones, will you love being simple?" Well, that word simple, again, it's like simpleton, uneducated, stupid. Right? That's really what it means. How long are you going to want to remain stupid? You have all this access to God's wisdom. Why don't you access it? Why don't you listen to it? If we lack heavenly wisdom, it's really because we want to remain foolish. That's what Solomon is saying here. You're rejecting it. You're wanting to stay as you are. You have all this opportunity to learn God's wisdom, but you would rather just be foolish. And I can kind of understand that because remaining foolish is real easy. You don't have to do much, right? You just keep on doing what you're doing. Just moseying along. But to gain God's wisdom takes work. Right? You've got to read it, you've got to study it, and then you've got to implement it, and you've got to make changes in your life. That's hard. It's a lot easier just to remain simple, remain foolish. What Solomon is saying here is that we are going to reap what we sow. Right? If we want to sow foolishness, if we wanted to invest into just remaining foolish, we're going to reap foolishness. But if we invest in God's wisdom, He will give it to us. We will become wise. We'll have heavenly wisdom for earthly living. In verses 25 through 27 and verse 32, he tells the foolish what they're going to reap. Right? He says that this is what you're going to reap. Because you have ignored all my counsel and would have none of my reproof, I also will laugh at your calamity. I will mock when terror strikes you. When terror strikes you like a storm and your calamity comes like a whirlwind. Right? Bad stuff is going to happen if you want to remain foolish. And at that moment, it's too late to call out for wisdom, to try to learn wisdom when you're already in the midst of it. Right? You're in the whirlwind. There's no wisdom there. And then that verse 32 that haunts them. For the simple are killed by their turning away, and the complacency of fools destroys them. There are consequences for being foolish. There are consequences for remaining simple, for remaining foolish. Foolishness leads to disasters, and once that disaster strikes, it's too late to try to get wisdom. It's too late. But likewise, there is positive consequences for acquiring wisdom. In verses 23 and 33, Solomon says what we will reap if we seek wisdom. Verse 23, if you turn at my reproof, behold, I will pour out my spirit to you. I will make my words known to you. Verse 33, but whoever listens to me will dwell secure and will be at ease without dread of disaster. Without dread of disaster. So there are negative consequences for foolishness, and there are positive consequences for seeking wisdom, for gaining wisdom. If we seek it, God will give it to us. So look around the room, me included here. I see a lot of old dogs. Right? A lot of us, we're old dogs. We're set in our ways. We have certain ways of doing things. Been there, done that. I've closed my mind. I don't want to learn anymore. Right? For some of us, we haven't learned since we left school. But we can't do that. We've got to be open to God's wisdom. He wants us to continue to grow. Throughout our life, we should be growing more and more into the people that God wants us to be. Right? God is constantly working in our lives to bring out Christ-likeness in our life. Like a sculptor chipping away at a sculpture, he is molding us and shaping us. But we have to be open to it. We have to continue to learn. We have to continue to change as he leads, as the Spirit leads us. Our heavenly wisdom for earthly living is how God tells us what he wants us to do and be, what he wants us to become. So the three lessons, just to summarize the three lessons from chapter 1, we must have a teachable spirit. Right? If we remain teachable, the Lord will teach us. Point number 2, we must hang out with the right people. Right? We need to have good friends, people who will positively influence our life. And then point number 3, we must desire wisdom and be willing to make whatever changes the Lord reveals to us we need to make. Right? But we got to desire it. Those are the lessons from Proverbs chapter 1. And as Solomon said, we would do well to learn those lessons. This is what it takes to have heavenly wisdom for our earthly living.